Anything else, Yasa? Get back to you.
So welcome to MyFest 23, and thank you, Danny, for joining us today in MyFest and for doing this session. We're grateful for that, and because we don't have official introductions usually, so I'm gonna hand you over the floor so you can introduce the topic and the title for the session, and then go with your plan. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Yasser. Hi, everyone, welcome. I'm Danielle Dilkes. I'm a curriculum specialist at Western University in London, Ontario. So for those of you not familiar with Ontario, it's about 2 hours outside of Toronto. I'm also a PhD student at the University of Toronto, and I'm studying systems of kind of control in higher education. So this is a little bit of a spinoff of my doctoral work, but hopefully it's just going to be a fun discussion around the hidden curriculum of EdTech. So the way that I've designed this is a little bit experimental. We're going to be sharing Google Slides and actually editing in the slides together. So at the end, everyone will have a copy of hopefully bits and pieces of our discussion. So we're going to see how it goes. I've posted the slides link in the chat, and now I will share my screen. Hi. So again, this session is the hidden curriculum of EdTech. It's a variation on a presentation that I gave at the OTESA conference at Congress back in May. And throughout, I do have images. I'll describe them as we go through. Some of them are AI generated. So the image here, I asked AI to generate a technology-enriched learning environment. And so you can see some screens in the background with non-words. And then a room full of books. So it's sort of an interesting portrayal of a technology-enriched classroom. My access statement. So as I go through, as I mentioned, I'll describe visuals. There's not a lot of like theory or jargony words or technical words or anything, but if we do come across them, I'll explain them. If I say a word and you're like, I don't know what that means, just ask. It's like, oh, hopefully it's going to be kind of an open space. I invite you to participate however you're comfortable. So there's not a lot of us. So I think unmuting is fine, chatting. The slides are set up so people can write on them, annotate on them. If you just want to listen, participate silently, be reflexive, that's totally fine. Or any other way you want to choose. And then take breaks, leave early, come late. So it's very kind of fluid. So again, I have shared the slides in the chat. So if you are wanting to participate by actually working in the slides with me, please have them opened in a browser and we'll be editing them together. And then later on towards the end, we're actually going to do some on paper drawing if you have a pen and paper. So I do suggest you grab one now. I'll pause for a minute in case anyone needs to like run away and grab a piece of paper and a pen. And then we'll get started. I think that was about a minute. Okay. So because we will be using Google together, I'm aware that not everyone necessarily has used Google Slides before. So I'm just going to quickly talk about how to use it. I'm hoping it's a pretty low learning curve. The things that we're going to be doing in Google, editing. So if you have it opened, it has been shared, so everyone who's in it should be able to edit. And to edit, you would just click on whatever element you want to edit. So here you can see the flashing line. Now I can type. If you want to add a new text box, that's available to you up here. It's the T inside the box. So here I can add a text box. Because there are a few of us sharing the document, it's possible that we'll be trying to edit the same elements at the same time, but Google nicely allows you to see if that is in fact the case. So apologies, I had Teams turned off. Bear with me one moment. Sorry about that. So again, if you're trying to edit collaboratively, you'll notice if somebody else is editing an element. So in a different monitor, I am the anonymous wolf. And on the screen, you can see that this element is now highlighted in red, which means somebody else is editing it. So you should choose a different place to edit. The other thing we'll be using is comments, and comments are available to you using this comment button. It looks like a little speech bubble. If you click on that and click the comment bubble with the plus, that will allow you to add a comment. And then the only other thing we may be using are images if you choose to. And so to add an image, you would go into Insert, Image, and then you can choose to either upload from your own computer. You can search the web. And add, I don't know why I'm adding a broken heart. Let's make something a little bit more positive. An image. So once we get into it, play around. If you have questions, let me know, but I'm just hoping this gave everyone enough of an orientation that you're comfortable to pop in and play along. And so we're going to jump right into it. On slides 5 and 6, I have added a bunch of speech bubbles. I'm going to ask everyone to choose a speech bubble and just add your name and let us know why you're here. What drew you to the session? Why do you want to talk about the hidden curriculum of EdTech? Welcome, Maha. Welcome, Virginia. Welcome, Anonymous Chipmunk and Anonymous Hyena. I do love the animals in Google. Welcome, Danielle. Welcome, Sierra and Meg. So I agree with you, Meg. I don't think we talk about it enough. It is hidden for a reason. And it does remain hidden for a reason. And it's something that we should be talking about more. The hidden elements still seem hidden after all these years. And yeah, I agree, Virginia, new ones are always coming up, especially with the addition of technology and how a lot of practice has now become sort of reified through technology. So it becomes even more hidden. And Sierra, you're superficially aware there's a lot under the surface of teaching, and it's embedded in so many different systems and pieces. And Danielle, I want to examine things that enhance, inhibit, or complement learning to attain objectives. Yeah, and so part of the hidden curriculum is that it makes it harder for us to achieve what we think we're going or wanting to achieve because it exerts hidden influences on what we're trying to do. And welcome, Irene, as well. Curiosity of EdTech. Curiosity is great. All right, so now we're going to, slide 6 was just a duplicate slide. So we're going to jump into slide 7. And so if you were hoping that I was going to explain the hidden curriculum, I'm not, I might, but we're going to actually start with you guys telling me what you think it means. So what is the hidden curriculum? When you hear that word, what comes to, or that term, what comes to mind? What does it mean? And this doesn't need to be a textbook definition. There's a couple of different definitions out there. Just what does it make you think of? And if anyone's looking for a place to write, slide 8 also has some space. So I kind of tried to duplicate each canvas. So I see the top left, it says you have to have experience to understand it, or someone who can tell you. I think of first-gen students. So the hidden curriculum is often a term used to refer to the skills that are assumed by our students that first-generation students or students who come from different backgrounds may not have or may not have had experience of. And they tend to privilege those students who went through education in a certain way. And they tend to disadvantage those students who did not go through education that way. So skills like communication skills or assumptions on how we work together as groups or other kind of tacit knowledge built upon your lived experience. So that's definitely one way that it's used. Things that affect learning, cognitive, affective, that aren't explicitly stated as intended outcomes. They may be hidden agenda or maybe no one meant for them to happen. Yeah, so I like here how there are things that aren't explicitly stated as intended outcomes, but they are embedded in how the learning is designed. And I also like the how we've acknowledged that sometimes they are intended. Sometimes we're expecting students to learn a thing, but we're not very transparent about it. And other times it just sort of happens and how we design it. So it's an important distinction. Beyond the obvious, yeah. The things we say cannot be taught is the hidden curriculum. So a lot of those things that can't be taught or maybe can't be measured. So again, they're sort of like embedded in learning experiences. The curriculum that is assumed to be shared by all without having to explain due to supposed shared values, knowledge, and culture. And knowledge, values, knowledge, and culture will be a lot about what we're talking about when we're actually looking at ed tech tools. That's great. The hidden curriculum is maybe institutional material or culture that impacts the design of a course. Without this impact, the ideal is that the learning objectives and students and teachers shape the learning. Great. So Danielle, I like how you sort of said, ideally, our classroom experience is the community in the classroom, but there are so many things beyond that, so many layers in the institution that impact what happens there. I think that's a really important part of what we'll talk about too. The curriculum, the unconscious biases, reasons, and rules that we might not even be aware of that we bring to the classroom and end up transmitting to our students. Great. And that term bias is really important as well, because so much of it is we teach how we learned in the past, and we just sort of keep replicating these past systems of understanding without really knowing that we're doing it. I'm going to pause because I am talking a lot. Does anyone want to does anyone want to share or expand upon what you shared here? Unmute yourself and actually speak.
Hi.
Hi, Maha.
Hi, thank you for doing this session. You know what I realized? Hidden curriculum is something I talked about during my PhD, and then I don't hear about it enough. There's so much hidden curriculum to EdTech, right, that we don't talk about. I really like that Sierra brought in the unconscious bias part, but I think it's more than, because bias feels personal, and I think a lot of hidden curriculum is also institutional, which Danielle also brings up. So I love the way you've done these slides, and the hidden curriculum of the way you've done the slides and of using Google Slides in this way is really interesting too. So it's in a good way, because a lot of times the word hidden implies that it's hidden in a bad way, but it could be positive. It could be intentionally hidden, and it could be unintentionally hidden. Because I think there's a lot of different sort of political perspectives on what hidden curriculum is. But I just really love the way we're going about it here. So I just wanted to say that.
I like how you frame that as it could be like deliberately hidden, and then you wonder why. Like, why would we make the choice to make something hidden? So now you've given me something to think about, because that's really interesting.
I mean, no, I'll give you a very good example of that, right? So in the learning outcomes for my course originally, it was all focused on digital literacies and culture and understanding their own identity and things like that. And then when I asked my students what are the most important things to keep in my class, they said, oh, you focus so much on community and well-being. I just didn't have them in the learning outcomes. It doesn't mean that my own values aren't reflected in the way I teach the class. And so they felt it. So it wasn't hidden in the sense that I wasn't hiding it in my teaching, but it just wasn't written down. So if someone else came to teach my course, that part might not end up happening because it wasn't explicit, right? Why would I intentionally hide it originally? I think because people discouraged this kind of discourse of care as an actual learning outcome. But then after the pandemic, it became okay to do that. So now it's a little bit more explicit, and I have an assignment called a well-being assignment. You know what I mean? Explicit. It's not just something I do every now and then, but it's actually a thing. So I think the politics of an institution also might affect what's a hidden curriculum in a class, and then the opposite. I might be trying to do something, but the hidden curriculum in the institution makes it difficult for me to do what I want to do, and becomes a barrier or sort of an obstacle to certain kinds of learning.
Which means that sometimes the hidden curriculum isn't hidden from students necessarily, but hidden from institutions that would prevent you from making it explicit. This is very interesting.
I don't think I realized it until I said it.
You know, for a long time, I teach, you'll get this living in London, Ontario, but I would teach my students how to, in my classroom, how to get online and use our online, what do you call it, interaction, because I wanted to make sure that they had access in case of snow days, and our school never canceled class. So I wanted them to have access to it, but my school, that was considered online learning, and you had to get special permission for it, which in the long run, when we went remote, my students were all really ready for that. So I hid that part because my ultimate goal was to make them prepared for any situation within the classroom or outside of the classroom. So I think there's a lot of times that we hide things as teachers, or that we consider workarounds, but what we're really doing is hiding it from the institution and being somewhat subversive, and hoping that maybe there'll be enough pressure on the institution to change. That would be an example of hidden curriculum.
This is fascinating. You guys are giving me work now to go and see if anyone's done any work on the hidden curriculum as resistance to institutional policies. Because as Maha said, normally when we talk about the hidden curriculum, it's framed as a bad thing, like this kind of secret thing that's exerting force on how we teach. And you guys have just blown my mind. So thank you. All right,
One
so I'm
other
gonna
thing, there's just one other thing I put in the comments there. The I hate this word. It's not hegemony, but it's hegemony. that a lot of times we aren't even aware of what our hidden curriculum is, because we just don't know. We're in our culture, and especially if you've not left that culture, you don't know. So I don't think it's always intentionally bad or intentionally negative. Sometimes people actually, my international students would want to understand more about the American way. So sometimes students themselves coming in have a hidden curriculum that they're looking for. And I found that also when I was doing interdisciplinary. So I'd have, some of my students who were accounting students, for example, coming into a writing course because they wanted a writing skill that they could then use in case, because it would help them. It was a soft skill that would help them. But within their discipline, it was not really important.
I think students are often looked as a source of the hidden curriculum, but they absolutely are, because they come to our classes with expectations, with certain motivations that might be at odds with how the class is designed. So they exert a huge hidden and sometimes not hidden influence over how things unfold in the learning environment. I'm just seeing Sierra's written in the chat, when I teach general education biology classes, sometimes my agenda is just to get these non-science students to like and trust science. Would you consider that, Sierra, a hidden curriculum? It's not explicit. What? All right, so the definition that I like and that I sort of use in my work is the shadowy, ill-defined, and amorphous nature of that which is implicit and embedded in educational experiences. So it's sort of poetic in a way, also a bit disturbing, shadowy, amorphous. And then here on the left, I actually typed that exact quote into Midjourney and asked it to generate an image. And I found the image very disturbing, so I thought I would share with everyone. A couple of things that stood out for me in the image. It's a classroom. It's all sort of monotone beiges. There's no windows. It's sparsely furnished with just desks. There's no technology. There's books with some of the students. All of the students are essentially carbon copies of a young white male presenting student. They're not in community in any way, so they're all standing sort of siloed and alone, looking at things on their desks. It's very, I don't know, for some reason I find it very jarring. And then on the far left, if you look very closely, and I can zoom in a wee bit. Oh, maybe I can't zoom in a wee bit. Oh, if you guys have it opened, I'll let you zoom in because Google's not behaving for me, but there is a pair of legs sitting next to a desk with no torso. So I'm not even sure what AI was doing with that, but it is a very striking image. Maha's right, she wouldn't have guessed it was AI generated. Even with the torso-less legs, Maha?
No, I think the torso-less legs are a giveaway, but I hadn't noticed them.
It is, and it says like a lot of things about hidden curriculum is actually very impactful, because a lot of the work that I do is about inclusive design. And so here we see who, in our large data sets, who the world thinks it's designed for. Again, white, male, young, like this idea of the normative student. So it is very telling, and it says a lot of disturbing things about what those data sets see education to be. The other quote that I really like, less wordy, less flowy, but simply, why the damn thing does not do what it should. So I think when you guys were talking about the hidden curriculum, you were saying that it exerts sort of this influence and makes things not happen the way we plan. So we're not necessarily achieving our objectives, we're not achieving our goals, because there's something changing the way things are working. So why the damn thing does not do what it should. This is also an AI generated image, slightly less provocative, I'd say. So it's just sort of a shattered robotic face sticking in a screen. A little bit dystopian as well, though. And
I
so
have
now,
a question
yeah, go ahead.
about something. I'm trying to remember if this would be considered hidden curriculum or not, but a lot of times I go in to observe someone's class and they're wondering why the discussion isn't flowing very well. And a lot of times it's just because the students are facing forward rather than sitting in a circle. And I feel it's not really hidden, it's right there. But people don't notice the impact of how the seating looks. And so I don't know if you would count that as hidden curriculum or not.
I
Yeah,
would,
so-
because why are they sitting in rows? Why
I
is
never
it that
understood why classes look like that in the first place, to be honest. I guess the
My-
assumption is someone's lecturing, right?
right, my school sent out the last 2 years that I was teaching, they sent out a diagram of how you should leave the classroom after you've taught. And they were all in rows. And it was like, why are you sending this out? That is definitely hidden curriculum. We want them all to be in order, looking at the teacher, so teacher-centered, students behind, one behind the other. I feel that's one of the main hidden, your spaces is very much the hidden curriculum. If you're teaching accounting, for example, why do they have big tables out for you to be working? Because they expect you as an accountant to be working in pairs or with other people. Science labs, if you look at how they're set up, why are they set up like that? So I think all of that is a really strong hidden curriculum.
Yeah,
No,
I would absolutely agree with
I feel also like that it's also about the seating, and it's about the professor himself or herself when they are lecturing or either doing the group work. So I've always, as a student, I've always noticed that whenever there is a kind of a professor who used to move in the class between the students while they are seating, it always like sometimes encourages some people to discuss, but some other times like discourages people to discuss. And I think it's a part of their hidden curriculum to always, the professor puts themselves on the discussion. I want to encourage you to feel welcomed and to feel caring. And while they do not have this in their syllabus, the idea of feel welcome and feel the community part, they're moving to just encourage the familial relationship, or it's not a familial actually, but it's a metaphor. It's to encourage the friendliness vibe into the classroom. I don't know whether this can be considered also a hidden curriculum or not.
I think everything you guys have described can be considered hidden curriculum. The physical design of space absolutely is, because it's meant to convey a certain understanding of what teaching and learning is. Beyond that, some of my work is like higher institutional levels, and they talk about like mapping the campus. And on campuses, you'll notice the buildings that look the newest, that are the fanciest, tend to be certain disciplines, because they're better funded. So on my campus, for example, we have a beautiful business building, a beautiful engineering building, and our buildings that are in disrepair are the humanities, the social sciences, the arts. And so there's a hidden curriculum there as well at the institutional level of how we position the value of these different disciplines. So it is kind of embedded in all of those things in that physical design space. Maha, it's great that you're talking a bunch. So the whole point, I was hoping to not do a lot of the talking, so this is awesome. A prof who doesn't realize they're passive aggressive might bring in hidden curriculum. Yeah, absolutely. And on the flip side of that, I work with a lot of new faculty who are very uncomfortable in the classroom at first. So they try and exert more control over their students to establish and to kind of counter their own self-consciousness about their expertise. So some of it isn't necessarily meant maliciously, but it's about how they're positioning themselves in the classroom. And then Virginia says, absolutely, that is why the damn thing does not do what it should. So we've already started the next part of the conversation, which is where does the hidden curriculum exist? So we've been talking about physical space, but on slides 11 or 12, and I didn't pre-populate them with speech bubbles, so you guys can choose how you want to add. I thought if you wanted to use some images here, that could help too. But where in our courses, in our institutions, in our classrooms, in our technology, where does the hidden curriculum exist? And again, there's two slides. So there's slide 11 and 12 are both the same canvas. So if you're looking for space, please choose whichever slide is better. I can also create more. So I see there's still a lot of typing, but I'm going to start to comment on a couple of these, and I encourage anyone to jump in at any points. Talkative is great. But I see language has been mentioned a few times, and language is actually a really interesting source of the hidden curriculum because we don't really think about the connotations in certain language choice. So how we frame things. So language, absolutely. Language can exert control. Language can reinforce those hegemonies, or we say hegemony. So I know Virginia was like, I don't know if that's how we actually say it, but so language, absolutely. Imagery, yeah, so the actual visual representations used, grading systems, assessment, grading is one of the ultimate sources of the hidden curriculum, one of my favorite things to talk about, but absolutely grading systems and how we design and define assessment tells our students what's important. There's a very clear relationship between assessment and values, and that is quite often part of the hidden curriculum. Seating arrangements, so we sort of talked about classroom design already and where the instructor is positioned in the classroom, how students are positioned in relation to each other. In college orientations, So I don't disagree with this. I find this interesting. I'm not sure who added it, but I'll pause in case somebody wants to expand on this.
Yeah, I just think that we teach like this is how it should be, this is how you should approach your classes. And I mean, like there's these rules about how to exist in college spaces. I think that we put forth right from the beginning in college orientations.
I love that phrasing. I'm going to add that. Rules about, can you say that one more time, Sarah? About
How to
we
exist in college spaces, or how college, how, you know, it's like, yeah, I guess just how to do college, right? Or how to approach your classes and things. I think we start to bake those in right from the beginning.
And so often they assume that your students are a certain person in a certain place in their life with certain resources. So I find that really, really,
Right.
yeah,
Right.
I really like
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Yeah, I think that they really gear those towards the students living on campus, who are in the dorms, you know, eating their meals there with them, that they have a certain community of other students and aren't working full time or taking care of families and things like that.
that's a very, very true. Like who that that normative student is. So fascinating. So we see also sort of more outside of the classroom as well in the school's administration's priorities and policies. So at all levels of the institution, they all sort of exert a force downwards into our classes. Very, very true. The institution teacher students can be hierarchical, encouraging of openness, focus on relationships. So the types of cultures and values that influence learning. And I like this. I work more in open spaces, so I like the positive spin on this. Again, the hidden curriculum isn't necessarily this nefarious negative influence, but it could be about how we construct those open relationships. Again, anyone who I'm commenting on your thing, if I'm misrepresenting what you've said, or if you want to jump in and expand, please do. Deadlines and choices of dates for things like exams, and tied to this also is the level of flexibility. So I work in my role as a curriculum specialist, I work a lot with faculty who, some of them are very rigid. Like if it's 1 minute late, you lose 5 points. And you're like, why? Like what are we trying to reinforce there about grades and how we're using them punitively instead of an actual measurement of learning, and B, the relationship between the instructor and the student.
Can I just expand on something here about the Egyptian education system? So
Absolutely.
Egypt is a majority Muslim country, and we have around 10% Christians, minority. And sometimes some really important government exams are done, like the Egyptian Christian Christmas is January 7th. And it's happened before, like they've started giving that day off, but it used to not be off, and there would be exams on that day, or there would be exams like the next day, just like Christmas, the day after Christmas, which is so problematic, I think, in those sense. Like they would never do that with the Muslim Eid. And then on the other hand, when students are doing British exams or French exams or whatever, they often don't consider our religious holidays, even though they know it's an international thing, so they should probably try to avoid like big holidays for major religions. But I think in both ways, people tend to not do that.
I could say very much in Canada, our semesters are built around like the 2-week break around, they call it the winter holiday, but built around Christmas essentially. So it's very much the case. In our policies, we've become better at providing other other holidays for other religions off, but it took a while to get there. Does anyone else want to add anything? Okay, so the hidden curriculum, looking at that bottom right, exists in any item, symbol, message, policy, configuration of items, etc., that influences learning and the culture of learning in a given class. Yeah, it exists everywhere. I guess would have been the simple answer is just it's everywhere. I specifically like, and I'm not sure who added this, the configuration of items. So it's not in each individual thing, but it's in that kind of system of all of those things coming together and exerting influence on each other. And in those systems, some of those items, some of those objects have more power. So they exert more influence over what happens in the classroom, and some have less. And then at the very bottom, it says use of tech platforms, Turnitin, surveillance, and mistrust. Yes, we are going to be talking specifically about technology very soon. But that is why we're here, is looking at the assumption a lot of institutions make is that technology is neutral, which it very much is not. And it has its own hidden curriculum and adds in new influences into this complex system of what is actually being enacted in our classrooms. And our next slide, top down, upper management, absolutely. So our upper level leadership and the influence they exert. And again, I work very much in the micro, in the classroom, and the people who make those policy decisions at the top sometimes are so far removed from what happens in the classroom that the influence is not really necessarily an accurate reflection of what we're trying to do in our teaching spaces. Choice of content and learning activities, the learning environment, the intersection of what the teacher teaches and what the students want to learn, absolutely. So both the teacher and the students exert influence, even though we often assume the teacher makes the choices. That is not the case. The contract of the syllabus, institutional language and policies required on the syllabus. Yeah, absolutely. The LMS, student preferred ed tech tools and choice of ed tech for particular classes and students. I feel like whoever wrote this is leading me nicely into the rest of the presentation, so thank you. And success, like how do we define success? What does it actually mean? And what does it mean for the institution, for the students, and for the instructors? I'm going to pause again in case anyone wants to, the person who submitted either of these wants to reflect on it or share further.
Well, it just the part about the choice of ed tech, one of the things that situations that came up was this sort of hidden curriculum where I had to not make it so hidden anymore, was when my students would push back when I didn't want to use the LMS because it didn't allow us to have the level of communication I wanted. And they kept saying to me, because I was an older teacher, they kept saying, well, have you ever used it? And I was like, I used it when it was being developed. You know, I understand how it's been set up and how it's all of its different iterations. I knew it backwards and forwards, but it didn't do what I wanted it to do. And my students, I had to actually, it was no longer a hidden curriculum piece. I had to sort of come out and explain to them how it was set up and what I wanted my students to do, and how this was not allowing it to do that. And then they were like, oh, okay, well, we'll learn this other, but there was real resistance against using a different technology than what they were used to and that they used in all of their other classes.
So I really appreciate that example, Virginia. I teach a class on open and distributed education, which is deliberately designed not in the LMS. And at the beginning of the term, every term I get pushback from students saying, where's my course in Brightspace? Why is the course not showing up? And I've had to make it, because the course is about openness, I've made it very explicit, like why that decision is made. But I have experienced something similar. And part of it, as you mentioned, is also what we've taught students to expect. So a lot of student expectations are built on what came before to do with our systems, but also grading practices. So in higher ed, it's really hard sometimes to employ ungrading because they've been taught that grades are the thing. Grades are our transaction in the classroom. So much of it is what has come before and what have students learned about what learning is.
And that also ties into the how is success defined? Because, and I teach or taught a lot of the freshman, sophomore students who came in from high school. And their idea of what success was very different than what the university's idea of success was. So it was, and that's where also then that intersection with the teacher, you know, well, I'm teaching you a new way of determining success, and they didn't like that. And so, you know, a lot of what I did for my freshmen, I didn't necessarily do for my seniors, because in order for them to be successful and stay in college, they needed to learn some of these elements of the hidden curriculum. But by the time they were seniors, the assumption was, well, you already know. And I tended not to really address the hidden curriculum in there because I just assumed that they would know.
I find the word assume, and we were talking about sort of language, actually is really, really relevant, because a lot of the hidden curriculum is actually just a misunderstanding about what mutual expectations we have or what assumptions are being made. And that's actually a very last minute. I added the slide here on how to use Google, because I was going to go in and assume that everyone's used Google Slides before. And I was like, that's hidden curriculum on my end, because that's my experience. But it's really interesting how much of the hidden curriculum is actually hinges on those assumptions that we make about who our learners are, where they're coming from, and why they're here.
I actually had a question there. So I thought it was interesting. I came in when you were doing that, and I was like, okay, that's nice that you're doing that. But I'm like, I wasn't there first. Like, do we all need that? Do some of it? It's always like, if one person needs it, it's worth doing, right? And it's really embarrassing to ask, does anybody not know how to do that? So you're just like, I'll just do that anyway, make sure everyone knows. And, you know, a little bit of me is like, oh, come on. And then I'm like, no, but it's possible that someone doesn't know. So it's better that everyone knows. So that was really, there's so much good pedagogy in this session, but just the way you model it. So thank you.
It's all from learning from previous sessions. So I have made assumptions before about tools, especially in Zoom, and everyone used the whiteboard, and then people are like, I don't know how to do this. So yeah, it comes from experience of doing it wrong. All right, so now we're going to jump into a couple of actual examples. They're all visual examples, so I'll quickly describe the images, but the question for each example is, what values, assumptions, and beliefs about education are embedded in this space? So the first one, we've actually already sort of talked about physical design, but this was my kind of easing into the conversation of the hidden curriculum. It is a picture, again, AI generated image of a classroom where there is an instructor at the front of the room standing at a podium. And he's physically very, very tall, kind of looming over the class. In the class, there are static seats of students that are relatively spaced out. Most of them have space or an empty seat between them and the person next to them. They're all facing directly forward, staring at the person at the front of the room. So the question again is, what values, assumptions, and beliefs about education are embedded in this space? What does the design of this space say about what education is, who the instructor is, what learning is, etc.? And I invite, if anyone wants to unmute and jump in, if anyone wants to just type in the chat, if you want to use the commenting tool in Google, you can contribute whatever way feels most comfortable to you. And the slide is slide 13.
So for me, it looks like church. It does not look like educational. So I would say that it's probably that all content, everything is coming from that person in the middle. But there's also a certain authoritative, you must listen to this person because they know all. Because there's no desks or anything. There's no way. The other thing is they all look like old people. So, because they all have like white hair. So I'm like, you know, there's something about sort of old fashioned maybe. And you know, that you can't question that. That's why I always think about is like my mom's generation of people. you never questioned anything that the authority said. You just went along with it. So that was my first impression.
Part of what you've described there, Virginia, may also just be the AI element. I did say make it like I gave it instructions on creating a lecture theater with static seats. Like I gave it quite similar to the description I just gave. So they are supposed to be students, but so I see Sage on the stage. In the chat, people have mentioned authority, lecturing and using power. So there's a very clear power dynamic built into this space where the knowledge is at the center of the room. Very much the transmission model of education, or the banking model of education here. Assumes people don't need to move or see each other's spaces. So there's actually a very clear way that the room is designed and how it creates relationality between students. And it doesn't. You might have students like whispering to each other, although the presence of the man at the front suggests that he probably would not take kindly to that. But there's a very clear relationship that the only real relationship is the person at the front transmitting to the students in the seats. All eyes to the front of the room is where we all look. The teacher seems to look bigger in size. And again, that was not really intentional, but AI did that for us. The classroom is dull, so the colors is very monotone as well. It doesn't encourage lively engagement or discussions, and it assumes that learning will occur through listening only. There is no writing board, no posters, no projection screen. It can be fine for some courses that rely on oral communication. Yeah. So no written or visual proof of what, wow, you guys are going even deeper. Yeah, there's nothing to sort of document what's happening in this space. Maybe the students are taking notes. It is actually devoid of anything on the walls as well. So that says something about visualizations, kind of creating a space that feels comfortable. And then I see conformity as well from Bridget. So conformity, absolutely. Like there's every student is in the same sort of space, doing the same sort of thing. There isn't room here for students to need to have different needs. Does anyone else want to add anything? Very limiting. All right, so we're going to move on to the actual EdTech, because the title or the session is called The Hidden Curriculum in EdTech, and we haven't really talked about tech yet. But if we move on to slide 14, this is another educational space, and it is a screenshot of an online module with multiple chapters or sections, and it has a red circle with a line through it, suggesting that something is not clickable, with a warning message that says lessons must be completed in order. So the question again is, what values, assumptions, and beliefs about education are embedded in this space? What does this say about learning or power or the students or the instructor, whatever you'd like to reflect on? And again, I invite you, you can unmute, you can type in the chat, or you can comment in the slides. Yeah, Maha says that learning is linear. Yeah, absolutely. Is academic gatekeeping a relevant term for this? Interesting. For me, I think academic gatekeeping is more about access to the institution, but it probably could apply here as well, Yazar. Linear thinking, the designer knows the best sequence, learners have no agency. One-way communication. So in some ways, this type of design replicates what we saw in that classroom image. As somebody has posted all the content online, they're the expert. The locus of knowledge is in the module, and students are just those recipients. The linearity is also really interesting because it assumes that every student needs to engage with the content in the same order to achieve maximum success, which we know is not really the case. Right, all students are very similar to each other. Oh, Irene, go ahead. Sorry, not paying enough attention, I think.
No, Mine is a little longer. I'm imagining that I'm the kind of people or learners that read through everything, then come back and do things. So if I'm limited to have to finish something before I go on, then that actually makes me, big word to use, hate the lesson or the subject or even the teacher or the professor. So it's one of those things that actually brings in a lot of emotion that shouldn't be if that was not there. Yeah. I couldn't write that in the text. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. And I think what you've actually just reminded me of is that it also assumes that a lot of these modules or learning experiences are like one-time things. Because I work in digital education and we have discouraged building modules like this, but what happens if a student goes back to revisit it and wanted information from the 4th chapter, the module forces them to start at the beginning, like go from the very beginning again. So it also limits the utility, like the use of the learning. So as you said, like if you're a learner who likes to go back and forth, this can be very limiting for how you engage with learning.
I think
And
though
then
that there is the assumption that this is something that's bad. I like to keep my modules open, but I also sometimes some students get information overload. And if you open everything up for them, then they get lost. Or if you have discussions that are going on, and people are, you have a certain time frame for that discussion. I always leave it open after it's been open, but to open it early, sometimes pedagogically, I don't want them to know what the next step is, because I want them to work through something, maybe make assumptions, maybe, and then when they go to, because these are 2 different scenarios, maybe go to the next scenario where they see something that was totally different than what they had expected. If you're asking them to make predictions, for example, or you're asking them to look at something the way it is now, you don't want them then to know that the next thing is going to be, this is a scenario that happened where all of your assumptions now are just thrown out the window. So I think even the assumptions that we're making about what this means, I sometimes have with my students, because they make certain assumptions based on how it's set up, but then you can surprise them.
I love that. So it still has, I think it still repeats the same assumptions. It's just that the assumption has a justification. So, I mean, you are deciding for the students the order, that is the assumption. However, there's a justification for why you're deciding the order for them. It's not in order to remove their agency. It's in order to have a certain storyline, or you know what I mean? So it still has, and I think that's why some courses have it that way. I don't think all of them have a good justification like the one you gave, but the one you gave makes sense.
So I'm going to do like a soft promotion. Tomorrow, I'm doing a follow-up session to this that talks about sort of architectures of control. And we talk about that. So we'll talk about sort of when we first look at control, we're like, it's bad, let's get rid of all of it. And then we sort of dial it back and we look at where we make deliberate choices around control for how students learn and how students engage in learning. So for those of you who are available, I should know the time. I don't know the time off the top of my head, so I will defer to some of our wonderful organizers. But we're doing a session tomorrow on hostile architectures and architectures of control in ed tech. I've never heard the term tyranny of structurelessness, Maha, so I'm gonna have to go check that out as well. This is why I love doing these sessions, because as the facilitator, you actually do a lot of the learning. Okay, so I'm going to jump to our next one. We're going to skip slide 15 and go to slide 16. I put lots of examples in here, but there are a couple that are more complex. So slide 16 shows a screenshot of a grade book in a learning management system at an institution where I work. The first column is a list of students. They've all been fuzzed out here. The second column is a list that says submitted date. All of the student submitted dates are marked with a red word that says late. The next column is status. Every student is marked as returned. The next column is grade, and the grade are numbers ranging from 32 to 38. The next column is turn it in. Every single student has a red flag with percentages ranging from 100% for the top student, going down to 53%. Oh, apologies. The bottom two students have orange flags, not red flags, for 55% and 53% respectively. And the final column says released with a check mark. So the question here, that was a lot of information, but the question here is what values, assumptions, and beliefs about education are embedded in this space? Virginia writes, I hate the late one. And the fact that the late is in red actually says some things as well. I know culturally red means different things, but in the culture where this LMS is being used, red is usually a bad thing. Plagiarism detection and timeliness matter. Yeah. Assumes that, oh, Danielle, did you want to share?
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize my mic was on. But I think one thing, if I look at this, if you look at the dates, there are a lot of assignments around the same dates. So depending on how big or small they are, you know, I don't know how much the instructor might have taken into account. Like, that's a lot of work to hand in a short period, even if they're small assignments. You know, you get someone like me who, when I was a student, I would, I always saw the assignment as bigger than it really was. And so even the smallest task would have me like, oh my God, this is going to take me 5 hours. So yeah, the professor wants to track, okay, what's late, what's early, and what's on time and all of that. And, you know, that has its issues. I often, in high school, I always, or often handed in things late. I was, it was my fear of the task that delayed me in doing the work. But in this case, that's a lot of pressure to put students to do things in a short time.
I think these are all different students for the same assignment though. But they're all late.
Oh, sorry.
But they're
Okay.
all late. They're all late on the same assignment, which must mean that the deadline is not realistic.
Maybe
But I
that's
also
it.
hear what you're saying though. I get you about feeling the assignment is too big. And all that.
So maybe I should provide a little bit of context. All of these students submitted and then resubmitted. It was a 2-tier assignment, but the late indicates that their second submission was after the initial deadline, because our learning management system doesn't allow you to do a 2-tiered assignment that way. Again, so sort of that hidden curriculum on how students learn. And that's also why Turn It In is flagging lots of students, because they went through it twice.
So then
the
whoever,
context there might clarify a little bit.
oh, sorry. So that means that whoever designed the system didn't design it for flexibility. The teacher may have wanted to bring in flexibility. And so maybe all this lateness is fine. And the teacher might have said to the student, don't worry about it being late. It's going to indicate that. But the system itself sends the message, oh no, this is late, you are bad.
And for a lot of students, that's very jarring. That like red late, you get students emailing saying, oh, did I lose points? I wasn't really late, like that panicked email. So this system forces a certain reaction and relationship between the instructor and the students. The slides are shared with everyone. So on slides 15, 17, and 18 are a couple of other examples. But I am going to jump forward, just cognizant of time, to slide 20 and ask, why do we care? So we sort of looked at different systems, different technologies have these embedded assumptions about learning. So they have embedded values, embedded ideologies, embedded beliefs, embedded power structures. why do we care? Why are we even talking about this? So if I ask everyone to join me on slide 20 and or 21, why do we care? So Meg says, because it causes students unnecessary stress. And some of those mechanisms of specific tools or the specific hidden curriculum can do that, especially by reinforcing certain power structures. Because learning can be interrupted or enhanced by these hidden curriculum elements, impact different on different people. Yeah, so it's not, and I think we've sort of talked about this throughout, it's not necessarily that we want to get rid of it. We don't want to erase all these influences, but it's building that awareness. We need to know what's happening, so we know how to respond. Once you see it, it's easier to come up with other solutions, also so we can point it out to students, absolutely. So it's not just for us. So it's for us so we can design learning with awareness of these influences, but also so we can have a conversation with students. Either the system automatically marks things late, don't worry about it, don't stress about it, or this is why I'm doing this in this way. When Virginia was talking about, was it Virginia who's talking about the learning management system and choosing a different system? Having that conversation and being very explicit with students why you make design choices helps build that trust relationship with them. Danielle writes, I care because it's important to be aware of the things that influence learning. My aim is to design for effective and joyful learning, and I want to know what will influence students in having this experience. Absolutely. So we need to identify those places where the hidden curriculum is at odds or has tensions with our own pedagogy so that we can do things differently. We can adjust for them. So we know what influences exist and how we need to change or reshape what we're doing to address them. It influences students' academic perceptions, well-being, and perhaps effectiveness and efficiency of the system overall. Yeah. So a lot of the hidden curriculum exerts an influence on us as instructors, on our students as learners, and on other elements of the learning environment. So there's a lot of influence happening there. On our next slide, Virginia writes, because it is a barrier to how we may want to teach or want our students to learn. Yeah, it impacts everything in the classroom, and there may need to be more support than we assumed. Need to make curriculum more open, explain why we're doing something or how, right? Yeah, so it encourages us not just to reveal the hidden curriculum to ourselves, but to have that transparency with our students. I'll pause for a moment in case anyone wants to add anything else. And while I'm pausing, this is where if at the beginning I had asked people to grab a piece of paper and a pen. So this is where we will have an opportunity to do a quick drawing. If you're so inclined, you can also respond in text. But I'm going to pose a puzzle and we're going to talk about how to solve the puzzle. All right, so moving to slide 22. This is Dunker's candle problem, and you may already be familiar with it, in which case you probably already know the solution, but the problem is you are given a candle, a book of matches, and a box of thumbtacks. And there is an image on the left that shows a white, long, like tapered candle, a book of matches with one match bent up, and what looks like a flat cardboard box with a number of thumbtacks in it. Your task is to attach the candle to the wall above the table so that when lit, it doesn't drip onto the table. What do you do? And so you can type out your answer on slide 23. If you want to draw something on a piece of paper, we can hold things up to webcam to show, or you can just think through. But I encourage you to try and solve this problem. How are you going to attach the candle to the wall above the table so that when it's lit, it doesn't drip onto the table? And I'm going to give you guys 3 minutes to solve this problem. Virginia, can I ask you to explain your question? Does it have to be the actual candle? I can't envision what the alternative would be.
Okay, you could take the box and make like a candle, something that looked like the candle.
No, it
And
needs to be
had
the
to-
actual candle with the wick of the
Okay.
candle on fire.
Okay.
Yeah. So the only wrong answer is essentially if your solution results in wax dripping onto the table, then you haven't solved the problem. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily wrong, but it's not an appropriate solution to the problem. So I'll invite solutions in about 1 more minute. And again, you can, if you drew something and you're comfortable turning on your webcam, you can hold it up, or you can just describe it, or you can put it in text on slide 23. All right, I will invite anyone who would like to share their solution.
So I think that you tack up the box if it's made of cardboard. I don't know what the material is. And then you light the candle and let some of the wax fall in the circle in the box, and then put the candle on top of that wax and then light it again, and the candle is then standing in the cardboard box and it won't drip on the table.
Great. Did anyone have a different solution or a similar solution to Virginia?
So that was my first thought, like just put the empty box of thumbtacks or something underneath it. My other solution was, can we move the table? Like you did say to tack it above the table, but you didn't tell us we couldn't move the table. So I thought we could move the table too.
I did not say that, so I suppose you could do that.
I am not lighting the candle. I'm using alternative lighting. So I do not need to worry about the wax and anything. After all, candles are very dangerous. That's my solution.
Yeah, you guys are coming up with really, I used this activity like a lot of years ago, and these are much more creative solutions. So, and Danielle writes, light a match, melt a side of the candle, stick it to the wall, light the candle, set the table on fire so that the heat causes the melting wax to evaporate or burn before it reaches the tabletop. That addresses the prompt. I don't know how else to respond to that. So the traditional, when this is like sort of posed and it's meant to be a bit of a thinking experiment, the traditional solution is what, as Virginia suggested, which is to tack the box onto the wall with the thumbtacks, put the candle in the box, which prevents it from dripping onto the table. When they originally did this experiment, not very many people came up with this solution because of this concept of functional fixedness. So functional fixedness is this cognitive bias that when you look at an object, you're inclined to really only think about the scope of the use of that object and what you already know about it. So in the purpose for which the object was created or what you have previously used it for. And functional fixedness is a really important part of why we're talking about the hidden curriculum of EdTech, because quite often, if we're not critical about how our tools work, and we're not critical about the full scope of functionality of those tools, we get in this rut of, I was told that this tool performs like this, so I have to do things this way. And this is really kind of key to why we're even caring about this conversation, because our EdTech tools are designed in a certain way for a certain purpose, and it does impact how we practice. I will add this slide to our joint slide so you guys have that solution. Oh, and I see that there are, maybe I'll add it. Okay, there. There are also some solutions on slide 23. So yeah, so similar to the solution presented. So use the box to catch the drifts. And so part of this is talking about the technology pedagogy dichotomy and different ways of thinking about how technology and pedagogy or teaching practice mutually influence and constitute each other, so how they shape each other. So the technological determinism point of view is that technology drives practice. You have a technological tool, it functions in a certain way, so you have to teach in that way. And we know this isn't really how it happens. People use tools differently. So for example, I'm using Google Slides not to present, but to collaborate. And it wasn't designed for collaboration in real time like this necessarily, but we're using it differently because we can. Pedagogical determinism sort of goes the other way, saying that pedagogy drives practice. So regardless of your tools have no influence. You'll teach the way you want to teach because you can teach that way. And again, we know that's not really what happens because of the hidden curriculum, because of all of these hidden influences that change what we can do and how we do it. So Fons talks about the entangled pedagogy, which is this way in which technology and pedagogy mutually shape each other, which is closer to what's really happening. We use technology in a certain way because of our own values and beliefs, but technology also impacts the way that we engage. It does constrain us. It does change how we do things. But even if this is the case, a lot of what technology does is invisible. So we don't necessarily know how it's impacting our practice. We don't necessarily see the ways that we're adjusting or compromising or saying, okay, I'll do it this way because it's more convenient. I'll use the learning management system. I don't love it. It's not perfect, but it's more convenient. It makes things easier. So we slowly start sliding away from our own values and ideologies and beliefs about teaching because of technology and because we don't necessarily see how it's impacting us. One concept I really, really loved was from Reingold, where he talks about somnambulism or sleepwalking. And it's this idea that, especially nowadays where a lot of our instructors lack the digital literacy to understand and to see those hidden influences, those the hidden curriculum, this lack of awareness is resulting in people adopting tools, adopting practices that they don't really understand. And these are going to have, these choices are going to have long-term influence on sort of how education looks in the future. So if we're not critical now, if we don't take the time now to really examine that hidden curriculum, those hidden influences in the tools that we use, in our physical classroom spaces, in our policies, and all of those things we discussed, we're going to end up with a future that doesn't necessarily align with what we want because we're sleepwalking through the world. So this article, it's in the references thing, really, really interesting way to think about it. I use it with my students and ask them to look at, to reflect on what somnambulism means for teaching and for the future of education. And students also have brilliant insights into it, but it's a really, really good article. So I'm going to pause. There's some interesting chat. So Danielle writes, in my research, my theoretical framework referred to the co-evolution of pedagogy and tech as they influence each other and are changed through teaching and learning. Danielle, do you want to speak more to that? That sounds really interesting.
I was using a framework that was about human ecology. And so you would look at, so with ecology, you consider evolution, and we would look at how tech and education influenced each other. And then you would have, as you've been discussing, like different elements of the classroom, and then larger than that, the institution, and then larger than that, the regional influences, and larger than that, global things that all impact how teaching occurs. And therefore all of these things also influence how the ed tech is used, how the pedagogy is used. And then you have teachers involved. Do you have instructional designers involved? And one of the things that I learned about Tim Fawn's thing about entangled pedagogy is that there was one form of entanglement that's okay, it's there, we recognize that things are influencing each other. And then there was what seems to be his ideal situation, where you are aware of all of these things, and you, as best as you can, account for all of them in your designs so that ed tech and pedagogy benefit the most, or are used to the best benefit to the students.
And I do think that's sort of the ideal that we are moving towards. But then in those models where we lose sight of things sometimes is that student agency. So even if we account for all of those influences, the design, and this is sort of what my work is, the design still needs to be a co-design with students, because they still bring their own expectations, values, ideologies to the classroom. So sometimes our designing a course before we know who the students are adds extra hidden curriculum into the course. But your work, the ecosystem work, sounds really, really interesting. Do you mind if I reach out to you after the session? Because I'd really like to hear more about it. Awesome. So I'm recognizing, I think there's a session that starts right after this. I'm recognizing it's 11:27. So I did have some more kind of just talking about the harms from somnambulism, but I will just jump to my summary slides, which the point was ed tech is not neutral. Our technologies, much like all of those other factors in our teaching environments, have embedded values, ideologies, beliefs about power, beliefs about what teaching and learning are, beliefs about what knowledge is. So our goal is not, as I said before, is not to erase it. We don't need to get rid of them all. Not everything that's hidden is bad, but to understand it. We need to take those extra steps to know what those hidden influences are, so that we know how to react, either to embrace them, to say, this aligns with what I'm trying to achieve, with the culture I'm trying to create. So let's go forth and use it, or to take steps to resist it, to say, okay, this tool I have to use, but it doesn't exactly work, so I'm going to use it differently. And that kind of takes us to the end. The slides also have some references to those articles. And then an activity, if I thought if it was going to be slow and quiet, we were going to do an activity. That was not the case. So I want to say I appreciate you guys so much for all of your input and conversation. Everything was, from my perspective, was great conversation. I really enjoyed hearing your thoughts. So thank you all for coming. And I'll paste the slides link again, but these will exist in perpetuity online. So use them as you will.
Surely. Thank you so much, Danielle. This was amazing. And by the way, there's the slides in the end about, you know, take a tech tool and talk about the purpose and how does it position the instructor and students and so on. I'm going to use this in an assignment that I do already. So I jumped to those last ones. So thank you for that.
Brilliant. I'm glad they'll be used.
Looking forward to your session tomorrow as well. And now we have Teskin and Neriman, who are going to be talking to us about